The night was meant to be peaceful. Just another dinner filmed for the cameras, polished with laughter, smiles, and clinking glasses. But beneath that glossy surface, a storm was waiting. Reports began pouring in almost immediately, and fans replayed the shocking clips again and again, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. What should have been harmless chatter transformed into chaos no one expected. As silverware hit plates and glasses rattled against the table, all eyes shifted toward Yandy. In a move no one could have predicted, she suddenly turned the focus onto her own husband, Mendeecees. Her words weren't lighthearted. They were sharp, they were deliberate, and they left the entire room stunned. What was meant to be a carefully controlled evening spiraled into pandemonium. Witnesses described the moment her voice cut through the air, and the silence that followed. Mendes froze, his expression hardening instantly. His laugh was nervous, his words shaky, as he attempted to downplay the sting of her comments. But nothing about the moment felt like a joke. Before the atmosphere could settle, another explosive force entered the mix. Sierra. Instead of diffusing the tension, she jumped in, raising the conflict to an entirely new level. Gasps echoed around the room as arguments burst forth, accusations fired back and forth, and emotions boiled over in front of stunned guests. The question still lingers. Why did Yandy choose this exact moment to expose her truth? And why did Sierra fuel the fire rather than calm the flames? Insiders whispered about hidden betrayals, suppressed grudges, secrets too heavy to keep buried any longer. What was supposed to be nothing more than a refined gathering quickly became something unforgettable. The type of night that doesn't just make headlines, it rewrites them. Because when Yandy's calm words turned razor-sharp and Sierra's fury erupted, nothing could ever go back to normal. This wasn't just dinner. This was the start of a war. The energy at the table shifted in an instant. What began as polite chatter turned into an atmosphere so tense it could be cut with a knife. Yandy sat poised, her eyes scanning from face to face, as though she was rehearsing something in her mind. Every movement felt intentional. Every glance hinted at a storm building behind her calm exterior. Mendeecees leaned in slightly, still unaware of what was about to unfold. His guard was down. He thought this was just another dinner, another performance for the cameras. But Yandy's tone changed suddenly. Her voice grew sharper, her delivery precise, every syllable landing like a stone thrown into still waters. "Sometimes the truth has to be spoken," she allegedly said, her words echoing across the table. Forks froze midair. Conversations stopped instantly. Every set of eyes locked on the couple as silence swallowed the room. Mendeecees tried to laugh it off, a nervous chuckle spilling out as though he could dismiss her remarks as playful teasing. But witnesses swear Yandy didn't blink. She leaned in closer and delivered a revelation so personal, so raw, that jaws literally dropped. It was not a vague remark. It was a strike straight to the heart, the kind of truth that exposes wounds hidden for years. The room thickened with shock. Gasps rippled across the table, and Mendes's face told the entire story. Disbelief, then denial, and finally, a surge of anger he struggled to contain. Fans who later dissected the leaked clips insisted his reaction revealed everything. The twitch in his jaw, the tremble in his voice, the way his composure cracked before millions of eyes. This wasn't acting. This was real. Witnesses recall his voice trembling as he tried to push back. "You think this is the time and place?" he snapped, his chair scraping the floor as he leaned forward. His pride fought to regain control, but Yandy didn't flinch. Her chin lifted. Her gaze remained steady. Her words sliced through the tension like a blade. She accused him of truths too heavy to carry in silence any longer. The guests sat frozen. Some covered their mouths in disbelief. Others looked down at their plates, unwilling to intervene. And in that charged silence, one fact became undeniable. Yandy had pulled back the curtain. She had spoken what no one expected. The perfect image shattered in a single moment. The room erupted the moment Yandy's words landed. What had been silence turned into chaos within seconds. Mendeecees pushed back his chair so hard the sound echoed like a gunshot. His face was tight, his jaw clenched, and his eyes burned with disbelief. This was not the image he ever wanted exposed in public. He tried to gather himself, but his composure was already shattered. His first words came out shaky, almost broken. "You really gonna do this here?" he demanded, his voice cracking under the weight of humiliation. Gasps scattered across the table. No one had ever seen him so vulnerable, so stripped of his usual confidence. Yandy didn't move. She stayed frozen, her calmness cutting deeper than any scream. That stillness only enraged him more. He slammed his palm on the table, silverware rattling violently. Guests flinched, some leaning back as though physical confrontation was seconds away. Witnesses described the look on his face as a battle between rage and heartbreak. He wanted to explode, but he also wanted to retreat. Instead, he paced in circles, muttering under his breath, shaking his head as though denying every syllable. Fans who later dissected the footage argued his body language said it all. The refusal to make eye contact, the trembling hands, the desperate attempts to control the narrative. His denial didn't sound like strength. It sounded like fear. At one point, he turned back toward Yandy, his voice louder, his tone raw. "You trying to embarrass me in front of everybody? Is that what this is?" His words dripped with anger, but behind that fury was desperation. The man known for keeping his cool was now unraveling in front of millions. Yandy stayed steady. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't retreat. She simply let his reaction prove her point. And that drove him deeper into fury. The table was frozen in disbelief. Some guests tried to interject, stammering attempts to calm him down, but Mendeecees brushed them off. His pride was bleeding. His ego was collapsing under the weight of exposure. He stepped closer to her, lowering his voice now, but the microphones caught every syllable. "You think I'm weak? You think I'm not a man?" The vulnerability in those words shocked everyone, because behind the anger, the world was witnessing something Mendeecees had never shown: insecurity. He turned away again, rubbing his face, shaking his head as though replaying the scene over and over. But there was no escape. Cameras were rolling. Guests were frozen. Yandy's accusation lingered like smoke, refusing to clear. And in that moment, the reality was undeniable. Mendeecees wasn't just reacting. He was unraveling. His image of strength was gone. The fallout had begun, and there was no way back. No way back. The tension was already unbearable, but then Sierra erupted like a spark hitting gasoline. What had been Mendeecees versus Yandy suddenly spiraled into a full-scale eruption. Sierra's voice sliced through the air, loud, fiery, impossible to ignore. "You're not about to sit here and play victim," she shouted, pointing across the table. Her words weren't careful. They were explosive, the kind of words that can't be taken back once released. Gasps shot through the room. Some guests froze in disbelief, others whispered under their breath, but no one dared interrupt. Sierra wasn't just joining the fight. She was escalating it to a level no one anticipated. Her anger wasn't random. It was sharp, precise, and aimed like a weapon. Every syllable dripped with fury, as though she had been holding back grievances for far too long. She wasn't defending anyone. She was attacking. And her target wasn't only Mendeecees. It was the entire illusion of control at that table. Witnesses said her energy was volcanic. She stood, hands waving, voice climbing higher with each word. Plates rattled as the table shook under the pounding of her fists. Mendeecees fired back, shouting over her, but Sierra refused to back down. "You always act like you're above it all. Like nothing touches you!" She snapped, her face flushed with rage. But the truth always comes out, and now everybody sees it. Those sentences landed like bombs. Mendeecees' composure shattered further, his tone rising, his frustration spilling out in raw waves. The argument wasn't just between husband and wife anymore. It had become a battlefield with Sierra igniting the flames. Some guests begged her to sit down, their voices shaky, but she ignored them. Her anger drowned out every attempt at peace. Even Yandy, who had begun the confrontation, now watched quietly, her expression unreadable. Fans later claimed Sierra became the unexpected accelerant. Without her, the fire might have burned out. But with her, the blaze consumed everything. She pushed the moment past the point of no return. The room no longer felt like a dinner. It felt like a war zone. Words became weapons. Emotions became grenades. And Sierra was the one throwing them. The evening's unraveling wasn't slow anymore. It was rapid, merciless, unstoppable. Because when Sierra exploded, she didn't just escalate the conflict. She guaranteed destruction. The argument had exploded, but what lingered at that table was more than shouting. Beneath the noise, subtle undercurrents began to rise. Guests exchanged nervous glances, whispering behind half-covered hands, as if they knew more than they dared to admit. Every look carried weight. Every silence carried meaning. The surface conflict between Yandy, Mendeecees, and Sierra was obvious. But the real drama was buried beneath. The quiet betrayals, the unspoken rivalries, the years of tension no one wanted to expose. Some faces betrayed sympathy. Others showed barely concealed satisfaction. Because while the argument seemed chaotic, there were those secretly pleased to see the cracks forming. Enemies disguised as friends. Supporters who, deep down, wanted to watch the empire fall. Plates sat untouched. Glasses trembled in nervous hands. Even the laughter from earlier in the night felt like a distant memory, swallowed by suspicion. One insider later revealed that in those minutes of silence between the shouting, the air was suffocating. Not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. The rumors everyone had heard. The whispers that had never been confirmed. Now suddenly, they didn't feel like rumors anymore. Yandy's words were only the spark. Sierra's eruption was only the fuel. The true fire came from the tension already simmering under the surface. Witnesses claimed several guests avoided eye contact altogether, terrified the spotlight might turn on them next. Others leaned in, hungry for the drama, hoping the conflict would expose more secrets than intended. The energy shifted with every passing second. Mendeecees' anger wasn't just about Yandy's accusation. It was about reputation, about pride, about keeping shadows buried. And everyone at that table could feel it. The dinner no longer felt like a gathering. It felt like a trial. Every expression was a testimony. Every reaction, a verdict. The table had become a courtroom, and silence had become its most dangerous weapon. Some guests wanted to leave. Others couldn't look away. Because moments like these don't just reveal drama, they reveal alliances. They show who stands where when masks finally fall. And as the shouting slowed, the hidden undercurrents became impossible to ignore. Secrets were bubbling up. Loyalties were shifting. Trust was fracturing. The argument may have been loud. But the silence that followed? That was louder. Because sometimes the greatest revelations aren't in what people say. They're in what people refuse to say. The explosion at the table was unbearable, and finally, some guests tried to step in. They raised their voices, pleading for calm, begging both sides to lower the volume. Hands stretched out as if physical gestures could control emotional fire. But nothing worked. The first attempts at peace were drowned instantly. Mendeecees wasn't listening. Sierra wasn't backing down. And Yandy sat unmoved, her silence louder than the shouts echoing around her. One guest urged, "Come on, let's not do this here." But their words fell flat. It was like tossing water on a raging inferno, useless. Mendeecees barked over them, his pride erupting, while Sierra grew louder, determined not to be silenced. The more people tried to mediate, the worse it became. Two guests even stood, raising their voices above the chaos, hoping to restore order. Instead, they became targets themselves, snapped at by both sides for taking sides. No one could win. The group dynamic shattered piece by piece. What was once laughter and shared toasts dissolved into factions. People began choosing allegiances, whispering to one another, deciding silently who was right and who was wrong. It was no longer one argument. It was a fractured room. Witnesses later revealed the body language was unmistakable. Some guests leaned toward Yandy, nodding in quiet support. Others gravitated toward Mendeecees, crossing their arms in silent defense. And Sierra? She had her own small circle, egging her on with approving stares. The so-called peacemakers found themselves isolated, their voices ignored, their intentions ridiculed. Every effort at reconciliation made them appear weaker, out of touch, and powerless. The more they tried, the more invisible they became. By this point, the dinner had lost all sense of structure. It was no longer a gathering. It was chaos disguised as conversation. People weren't talking, they were screaming. They weren't listening, they were waiting for their turn to strike back. Fans who analyzed the footage later called it the exact moment the group collapsed. Because once the peacekeepers failed, there was no turning back. The balance was gone. The respect was gone. And the trust, already fragile, completely dissolved. This wasn't just one fight. It was the breakdown of unity itself. A collapse caught in real time, and as voices clashed, as tempers flared, as alliances shifted, one truth became undeniable. The group was no longer a group. It was a battlefield. A group. It was a battlefield. The scene no longer resembled a dinner. It resembled a battlefield. Words weren't just spoken, they were hurled like weapons. Every shout, every insult, every accusation landed with the force of a strike. Guests sat frozen, some with eyes wide, others clutching the edges of their chairs. The air was so thick with hostility it felt suffocating. What was meant to be controlled filming now pulsed with the danger of total collapse. Security, usually standing quietly in the background, suddenly tensed. Their eyes locked on the table, their bodies shifting, ready to move at the first sign of a physical blow. Witnesses later swore you could see it, the way their hands hovered near each other, prepared to intervene. The shouting only grew louder. Mendeecees' fury echoed, Sierra's rage collided with it, and Yandy's cold silence burned hotter than any scream. The atmosphere was combustible. Every second felt like the one where someone might snap. One guest leaned back, whispering nervously, "They're about to fight." Another glanced toward the exit, already preparing to run if fists started flying. The room had become unpredictable, a war zone without rules. Fans who replayed the footage described the tension as unbearable. Mendeecees pacing, Sierra's hand slamming against the table, Yandy's piercing gaze never flinching. Each detail heightened the sense of danger. Security edged closer, exchanging sharp looks, their postures stiff with readiness. The energy in the room told them the risk was real. If one wrong word was spoken, if one wrong move was made, it could ignite into something uncontrollable. The glamorous dinner had dissolved into something primal. Respect was gone. Order was gone. All that remained was chaos simmering on the edge of violence. Viewers later compared it to scenes from movies, except this wasn't fiction. This was raw, unfiltered reality. And as the shouting collided with the heavy silence between words, everyone knew one thing. The room was seconds away from disaster. Beneath the chaos, the true battle came into focus. It wasn't just shouting. It wasn't just accusations. It was Yandy's vulnerability colliding with Mendeecees' pride. Two forces, equal in power, opposite in nature. Her pain was visible, even in silence. The slight tremble in her voice, the way her eyes glistened though she refused to look away. She wasn't lashing out for attention. She was exposing wounds long buried, wounds that demanded to be acknowledged. For Yandy, this wasn't about cameras or spectacle. It was about truth, about finally releasing the weight she had carried in private for too long. She wanted him and the world to hear her, to feel her, to know her suffering wasn't a rumor, but reality. Mendeecees, on the other hand, refused to bend. His pride stood like a shield, guarding him from humiliation. To admit weakness would mean surrendering control. And control was the one thing he couldn't afford to lose. Not in front of Yandy, not in front of Sierra, not in front of millions watching. "You think you can tear me down like this?" He snapped, his voice cracking with fury. But the crack betrayed more than anger. It revealed fear. Fear of being seen. Fear of being diminished. Fans later said this was the most human they had ever seen him, not the strong, untouchable figure he projected. But a man caught between rage and fragility. Yandy's strength wasn't in her volume. It was in her refusal to break. Mendeecees' defense wasn't built on innocence. It was built on pride, stitched together by denial. The clash became symbolic, her vulnerability standing as courage, his pride trembling under pressure. Neither willing to yield, neither willing to let go, guests watched in stunned silence. Some saw Yandy's pain and ached with her. Others saw Mendeecees' defiance and recognized a man terrified of collapse. It was no longer just a dinner fight. It was a raw portrait of love, betrayal, pride, and wounds left untreated. And in that war between heart and ego, there could be no winner. Only destruction. The chaos didn't stay confined to that dinner table. Within hours, it exploded across social media like wildfire. Clips leaked, snippets circulated, and fans dissected every frame as though uncovering evidence in a courtroom. Twitter erupted first. Hashtags trended worldwide, each side rallying its own army of supporters. One camp shouted that Yandy was brave, finally voicing truths too painful to hide. Another camp defended Mendeecees fiercely, calling the moment a public ambush meant to strip him of dignity. The arguments didn't end there. Instagram Reels replayed Yandy's piercing words, slowed down, analyzed, captioned with fiery commentary. TikTok became a battlefield of reenactments, fan theories, and emotional breakdowns. Everyone had an opinion. No one stayed silent. For some, Yandy was a symbol of strength. They praised her courage, insisting she stood for every partner silenced by prideful men. For others, she was the villain, accused of humiliating her husband when cameras were rolling. The divide was sharp, the passion unrelenting. Meanwhile, Mendeecees' supporters insisted the footage was misleading. They claimed edits twisted his reactions, portraying him weaker than reality. But skeptics pushed back, pointing to every twitch, every tremble, every crack in his voice as proof the truth had finally spilled out. Fan pages clashed in heated debates. Podcasts dissected the confrontation line by line. Influencers capitalized, offering breakdowns with dramatic thumbnails and bold captions. What began as a private war became a global spectacle, watched, judged, and debated by millions. Some fans even dragged Sierra into the storm, arguing she had no right to escalate the fight. Others applauded her, claiming her eruption revealed what everyone else was too scared to say. The frenzy wasn't just noise, it was division. Families argued, friend groups split, entire comment sections turned into battlegrounds. And with every repost, every retweet, every stitched TikTok, the drama only grew bigger. The dinner fight wasn't just a moment anymore. It was a movement, a cultural flashpoint that ignited emotions far beyond the room where it happened. And one chilling truth became clear. This wasn't just their story anymore. It belonged to the world now. When the shouting finally began to fade, the silence that followed was deafening. No one laughed. No one whispered. The only sound was heavy breathing and the faint clinking of a glass pushed nervously aside. The once lively dinner had been reduced to rubble. Guests sat frozen, afraid to move, afraid to speak, as though any word might reignite the fire. The tension clung to the air like smoke after an explosion. Yandy remained seated, her expression cold, her posture unshaken. Mendeecees, however, stood restless, his body shifting, his pride wounded, his eyes darting as if searching for an escape. He looked broken but defiant, trapped between walking away and demanding control once more. Sierra's fury had simmered down, but her glare remained sharp, refusing to yield. Even in silence, her presence was volatile, a reminder of the chaos she had fueled. Slowly, one by one, guests began to rise. Chairs scraped against the floor as people made quiet exits, desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere. Some avoided eye contact, ashamed of what they had witnessed. Others left shaking their heads, stunned at how quickly everything unraveled. Security stepped in subtly, guiding the flow of departures, ensuring no sparks reignited on the way out. Their tense stares revealed the truth. This dinner had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. By the end, only fragments of the group remained. Yandy still at the table. Mendeecees pacing near the doorway. Sierra standing firm, arms crossed, daring anyone to challenge her. The silence spoke louder than any argument. It said the damage was permanent. It said the fractures couldn't be hidden. It said the night was over, and as the last guests slipped out into the night, one thing became undeniable. Nothing about this dinner would ever be forgotten. The dinner ended, but the fallout had only just begun. What happened that night didn't stay at the table. It echoed long after the cameras stopped rolling. Relationships were fractured. Trust was obliterated. Every bond that once held the group together now sat under suspicion. No one could look at each other the same way again. Yandy's confession didn't just wound Mendeecees. It exposed hidden fractures in their marriage that fans had long speculated about. Supporters claimed she finally spoke her truth. Critics argued she destroyed the foundation of their relationship in front of millions. Either way, the damage was undeniable. Mendeecees carried his own scars. Pride may have pushed him to defend himself, but whispers spread quickly. People questioned his strength, his loyalty, and even his reputation. For a man who built his image on control, this unraveling was catastrophic. Sierra's role only deepened the rift. By inserting herself, she created enemies where once there were alliances. Her explosion was praised by some, condemned by others. But one fact was certain: she would never again be viewed as neutral. She had chosen her side, loudly and without hesitation. Behind the scenes, the fallout grew darker. Old grudges resurfaced. Secrets that had been carefully hidden began leaking into conversations, fueling speculation. What was once dismissed as gossip now felt like undeniable truth. Every rumor gained new life under the shadow of that dinner. Friends who once dined together began avoiding each other. Calls went unanswered. Messages left on read. Smiles turned into forced gestures, while trust crumbled in silence. The long-term effects reached beyond personal lives. Careers were touched. Public images reshaped. Fans debated loyalties, and the media amplified every fracture with headlines that refused to fade. This wasn't just one explosive night. It was the start of an unraveling, a slow burn that would continue in whispers, in headlines, in painful confrontations yet to come. Because once secrets are spoken, once bonds are broken, there is no returning to what was. The night had ended, but the fallout was permanent. The dust has settled, but the questions remain louder than the silence that followed. What happens next for Yandy and Mendeecees? Can a relationship so publicly fractured ever recover in private? Or has the damage spread too far, too fast, to ever be repaired? Fans are left dissecting every glance, every word, every hidden detail from that night. Was Yandy's confession a moment of vulnerability, or a calculated strike fueled by years of unspoken resentment? And what of Mendeecees? Did his defense reveal strength, or was it the desperate shield of a man cornered by truth? The group itself stands in ruins. Sierra's eruption ignited tensions that may never heal. Friendships once unshakable now feel like brittle glass, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. Can peace ever be restored, or has the line between ally and enemy been drawn permanently in the sand? And then, the lingering secrets. Rumors that fans whisper about in every comment thread. Stories half revealed but never fully explained. Which of those buried truths will surface next? And who will be the one brave or reckless enough to expose them? This is no longer just a dinner gone wrong. It is a saga, a storm that has only begun to rage. Each player in this drama stands at a crossroads, forced to choose between pride and forgiveness, silence and revelation, loyalty and betrayal. But here's the haunting truth. Once trust is shattered in front of millions, the world will never look away. Every move, every post, every interview will be dissected. The court of public opinion has already taken its seat, and the verdict is still out. So we must ask, what comes next? Will there be reconciliation? Or will more shocking confessions plunge this circle even deeper into chaos? Could a new betrayal already be brewing, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? The answers remain hidden. But one thing is undeniable. This story is far from finished. So what do you think? Can love survive humiliation? Can loyalty survive betrayal? Or is this the end of an empire that once seemed unbreakable? Tell us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the next chapter promises to be even more explosive.